The warehouse had been silent for hours, the kind of silence that settles into places where nothing living is meant to be. Dust hung in the air, caught in thin beams of afternoon light filtering through high windows. The man moved through the space methodically, checking inventory, his footsteps the only sound against concrete that had grown cold with disuse. He had worked this route 100 times before, knew every corner, every shadow. Which is why he noticed when something didn't belong. Near the back wall, tucked behind a stack of wooden pallets that hadn't been moved in weeks, something small shifted. The movement was so slight he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. But then it came again, a tremor of fur against gray concrete, and he stopped walking. When he crouched down and looked closer, his breath caught in his throat. Curled against the wall, barely visible in the dim space, was a bobcat kitten. Tiny, fragile, and utterly alone. The kitten didn't run. He didn't hiss or bare his teeth or show any of the wild instinct that should have defined him. He simply sat there, his small body pressed against the cold floor, eyes half closed as if even the effort of staying awake was too much. His coat was dull, matted in places, his ribs visible beneath spotted fur. He looked like something that had wandered too far and forgotten how to find its way back. The man didn't know what to do. He stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, trying to understand how a wild animal had ended up here, in this forgotten corner of a building that offered nothing but emptiness. Maybe the kitten had slipped through a crack in the foundation, drawn by the promise of shelter. Maybe he had simply collapsed here, too weak to go any farther. Either way, he couldn't be left behind. With careful hands, the man wrapped the kitten in a towel he found in his truck. The small body offered no resistance, didn't struggle or cry out. He was limp, almost weightless, as if life had already begun to slip away. The man drove quickly to the nearest rescue center, the kind of place that took in animals when no one else knew what to do with them. Inside, volunteers gathered around the towel, their faces tightening with concern as they peeled back the fabric and saw what lay beneath. The bobcat kitten was placed on a table under soft light. Someone checked his breathing, his heartbeat, the temperature of his skin. He didn't react to their touch, didn't flinch when they lifted his paw or examined his eyes. He simply lay there, staring at nothing, as if the world had stopped mattering long before he arrived. One volunteer whispered that he might not make it. Another shook her head, refusing to accept it. They moved him to a quiet room, placed him in a small enclosure with a soft blanket, and began the slow, uncertain process of trying to bring him back. But something else happened that no one expected. From deeper inside the facility, past a row of closed doors and metal barriers, a sound stopped. Rex, the adult Doberman who had been kept in isolation for months, went completely still. The pacing that defined his days ceased. The low growl that rumbled in his chest whenever anyone passed by faded into silence. A volunteer paused mid-step, listening. Another turned toward the hallway, eyes wide. Rex hadn't gone quiet like that since the day he arrived. Rex had a history no one liked to talk about. He had come to the rescue center after something terrible, something that left scars no one could see but everyone could feel. He didn't trust people. He didn't trust other animals. He lived in a state of constant vigilance, muscles tight, eyes sharp, ready to defend himself from threats that existed only in his memory. Volunteers had learned to approach his enclosure with caution, to speak softly, to move slowly, to never reach toward him unless absolutely necessary. Over time, a quiet understanding settled over the facility. Rex was unapproachable. He was a dog no one could save. But the moment the bobcat kitten arrived, something shifted. Rex lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent carried through the ventilation system. His body stiffened, not with aggression, but with something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or recognition. He moved toward the front of his enclosure, ears forward, eyes focused on the direction the scent was coming from. When volunteers passed by carrying the kitten deeper into the building, Rex tracked their movement without making a sound. For the first time since anyone could remember, he wasn't reacting with fear. He was reacting with interest. The kitten was placed in a small enclosure inside the same secured room where Rex was kept. The space was large, divided by metal barriers designed to keep animals separated but visible. Rex had his section along one wall. The kitten's enclosure was set down across from him, far enough to be safe, close enough to be seen. The moment the enclosure touched the floor, Rex walked to the front of his space and sat down. He didn't pace. He didn't growl. He simply sat there, watching the small spotted shape across the room with an intensity that made every volunteer stop what they were doing. The kitten lifted his head slowly. His ears twitched, catching the presence before his eyes did. When he finally looked up, he saw Rex sitting there, tall and still, watching him with eyes that held no threat. The kitten didn't pull back. He didn't flatten himself against the corner of his enclosure. He simply watched back, his breathing slow and steady, as if the presence across the room was the first familiar thing he'd encountered in a very long time. Minutes passed in silence. The volunteers stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile connection was forming between the two animals. One whispered that she'd never seen Rex like this. Another shook her head in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. A traumatized dog and a wild kitten weren't supposed to find comfort in each other. But there it was, undeniable and impossible to ignore. The kitten's eyes began to close. His head lowered, movements growing heavier, as if the effort of staying awake no longer felt necessary. For the first time since he'd been found, he let himself rest without bracing for danger. He didn't listen for footsteps. He didn't flinch at distant sounds. He simply curled into himself and fell asleep, his small body rising and falling with each breath. Across the room, Rex didn't look away. He stayed exactly where he was, eyes fixed on the kitten, watching until the tiny creature's breathing settled into a deep, even rhythm. No one moved. No one spoke. It felt as though the room itself was holding its breath, afraid that even a whisper might shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the space. The volunteers continued their work with careful routine. The Bobcat kitten was examined, fed small portions of food, and placed back inside his carrier. Each step was slow and deliberate, every movement measured to avoid startling him. He was still weak, his body trembling with the effort of staying upright. When they set the carrier down, no one noticed that the latch hadn't clicked completely. It was a small oversight, the kind that happens when attention is divided between too many things at once. Time passed quietly. Then someone gasped. Across the secured room, the kitten was no longer inside his carrier. He was standing on unsteady legs directly in front of Rex's enclosure, so close that only the metal bars separated them. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard him move. He had simply appeared at the one place no one expected him to go. The room froze. A volunteer took a sharp breath. Another stepped forward instinctively and stopped. This was dangerous. A wild kitten loose in the same room as a large dog with a history of aggression. Every protocol they followed existed to prevent exactly this moment. But no one moved. No one intervened. Because something impossible was happening. Rex lowered his head. He didn't growl. He didn't stiffen or pull back. His posture shifted, slow and deliberate, as he leaned forward and breathed in the air between them. The kitten stayed where he was, small body swaying slightly, eyes lifted toward the dark shape in front of him. He didn't retreat. He didn't cry out. It was as if he had reached the only place that felt safe enough to stop. Their noses met through the bars, just barely. Rex didn't pull back. His expression changed, tension giving way to something unfamiliar. Confusion, caution, almost wonder. For the first time since arriving at the rescue, he didn't look angry. He didn't look like a problem that needed managing. He looked uncertain, caught in a moment he hadn't prepared for. The volunteers watched in stunned silence. No commands were given. No one intervened. They stood there, afraid that even a breath might shatter what was unfolding in front of them. A boundary had been crossed quietly and without permission. And somehow, instead of chaos, there was calm. After that moment, nothing felt the same inside the secured room. The kitten was gently guided back into his enclosure, hands shaking as volunteers moved with a care that bordered on reverence. No one scolded him. No one spoke above a whisper. It was as if the space itself had decided that noise no longer belonged there. The kitten settled quickly, his breathing uneven but calmer than before, his eyes drifting again and again toward Rex's enclosure. Over the next hours, the change became impossible to ignore. When food was placed inside the kitten's enclosure, he approached it with less hesitation. He ate more steadily, no longer stopping after every bite, as if expecting the bowl to disappear. His body still trembled, but it trembled less. Each small movement carried a fragile confidence that hadn't been there before. And every time he lifted his head, his eyes searched for the same place. Rex stayed close to the barrier. He no longer paced the length of his enclosure. Instead, he positioned himself where he could see the kitten clearly, sitting or lying down with his body angled protectively forward. When volunteers passed by, Rex watched them without the sharp edge that once defined him. His attention always returned to the small spotted shape across the room. One volunteer noticed it first. "He's waiting," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might undo everything. Another nodded slowly. "It's like he's guarding him." The kitten responded in his own quiet way. When Rex shifted, he shifted too. When Rex lay down, the kitten curled closer to the front of his enclosure, pressing himself against the bars. At one point, a soft sound escaped him. Not a cry, not a call, but something small and uncertain. Rex answered with a slow exhale, steady and deep, the kind meant to calm rather than warn. Even Rex seemed surprised by himself. Volunteers began to notice changes they had never seen before. Rex allowed a bowl to be placed closer without stiffening. He didn't snap when someone spoke nearby. One person dared to kneel outside his enclosure, speaking gently, not directly to him, but to the space they shared. Rex listened. He didn't turn away. It was as if the kitten's presence had rewritten the rules Rex lived by. Two broken paths were quietly aligning, not because anyone planned it, but because both animals had found something they didn't know they were searching for. In that shared room, between metal bars and careful distance, trust was beginning to grow. Slowly, dangerously, and against every expectation. And for the first time, the volunteers wondered if saving one of them might mean saving them both.